What if I told you that on a cold November evening in 1971, a man in a business suit walked onto a plane with $20 in his pocket and walked away 2 hours later as the only person in American history to successfully hijack a commercial aircraft and escape without a trace? Welcome to SherlockMode. The day before Thanksgiving, 1971, Portland, Oregon. The air was crisp, filled with the excitement of holiday travel. Families rushed through the airport, clutching tickets and suitcases, eager to reach their loved ones. But among the crowd of travelers, one man moved differently. Calm, calculated. He wore a simple black business suit, a white shirt, and a narrow black tie. Nothing about him stood out, nothing that would make you look twice. This ordinary-looking man approached the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. His voice was steady, polite even, as he asked for a one-way ticket to Seattle. He paid with cash, $20. The name he gave was Dan Cooper, but the world would come to know him by a different name, one born from a reporter's mistake, D.B. Cooper. Flight 305 was a routine afternoon run. A Boeing 727, the workhorse of commercial aviation. 36 passengers settled into their seats, most of them thinking about turkey dinners and family gatherings. The flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, moved through the cabin with practiced ease, checking seat belts and offering pillows. She noticed the man in 18C, the quiet one who had ordered bourbon and soda. He seemed nervous, but then again, many passengers were. At exactly 3:07 p.m., Flight 305 pushed back from the gate. The engines roared to life, and the aircraft began its taxi to the runway. Inside, Cooper sat quietly, his briefcase resting on his lap. His fingers drummed against the leather surface. What was going through his mind in those final moments before takeoff? Was he having second thoughts? Or was he simply counting down the minutes until his plan would unfold? 20 minutes into the flight, as the aircraft climbed through the clouds above Oregon, Cooper made his move. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. With the same calm precision he had shown at the ticket counter, he handed it to Florence Schaffner. She barely glanced at it at first, probably assuming it was another passenger complaint or a phone number from a lonely traveler. But when Schaffner unfolded the note and read the words written there, her blood turned cold. The message was simple, direct, and terrifying. I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit with me. Her hands began to shake as she looked up at Cooper. His expression had not changed. He was still the same quiet, polite passenger. But now, everything was different. Schaffner's training kicked in. Stay calm. Do not panic the other passengers. She moved slowly toward seat 18C, her heart pounding so loud she was certain Cooper could hear it. When she sat down beside him, he spoke in the same quiet voice he had used to order his drink. He told her he was serious. And then, with deliberate movements, he opened his briefcase. Inside the briefcase was a maze of wires, red cylinders that looked like dynamite. A battery. It was like something from a spy movie, except this was real. This was happening 30,000 feet above the ground, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Cooper looked at Schaffner and spoke again. His demands were specific. For parachutes, $200,000 in $20 bills. And he wanted it all waiting for him when they landed in Seattle. The next few minutes felt like hours. Schaffner had to relay Cooper's demands to the captain without causing a panic among the other passengers. She wrote down his message and walked to the cockpit with legs that felt like jelly. Captain William Scott read the note and felt his stomach drop. In all his years of flying, he had never faced anything like this. The captain immediately contacted air traffic control. Within minutes, the FBI was involved. Phone calls were made. Bank officials were awakened. The Seattle First National Bank began gathering $200,000 in sequential $20 bills. Each serial number was carefully recorded on microfilm. Meanwhile, law enforcement officials scrambled to find 4 parachutes that met Cooper's specifications. Back on the plane, an eerie calm had settled over the cabin. The other passengers had no idea that their flight had become the center of one of the most intense law enforcement operations in aviation history. They read magazines, dozed, and looked out the windows at the clouds below. Cooper sat quietly, occasionally sipping his bourbon. He made small talk with Schaffner, asking about her family, her career. It was surreal. Here was a man who had just threatened to blow up a plane, chatting about the weather. As Flight 305 approached Seattle, Cooper's demands had been met. The money was waiting, all 10,000 crisp $20 bills weighing exactly 21 pounds. Four parachutes had been located, 2 primary chutes and 2 reserve chutes, just as Cooper had requested. The FBI agents at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport watched nervously as the aircraft touched down. They had no idea what would happen next. The plane taxied to a remote area of the airport. Cooper's behavior remained calm and professional. He allowed all 36 passengers to disembark safely. He was polite to them as they left, even wishing some of them a happy Thanksgiving. But he kept the flight crew. Captain Scott, First Officer William Radizak, Flight Engineer H.E. Anderson, and Florence Schaffner. They would be staying for the next part of his plan. The money and parachutes were brought aboard. Cooper examined everything carefully. He opened the bag containing the cash and rifled through some of the bills. He inspected the parachutes with the eye of someone who knew what to look for. Satisfied, he gave new instructions to the crew. They were going to Mexico City, but not the way anyone might expect. Cooper's flight requirements were very specific and very strange. He wanted the plane to fly at the unusually low altitude of 10,000 feet. The speed should be no more than 200 knots. The landing gear should remain down. The wing flaps should be lowered. These were not the requests of an amateur. These were the demands of someone who understood exactly how aircraft performance would be affected by these configurations. At 7:36 p.m., Flight 305 took off from Seattle for the second time that day. But this time, it carried only 5 people instead of 42. Cooper had changed from his business suit into more practical clothing. He had tied the money bag to his body and strapped on one of the parachutes. As the aircraft climbed slowly into the darkening sky, he made his way to the back of the plane. The Boeing 727 had a unique feature that made Cooper's plan possible. The rear stairs, known as the aft stairway, could be lowered while the aircraft was in flight. Cooper instructed the crew to lower these stairs once they were airborne. The flight crew, following his orders, began the process. The rear door opened, and the stairs extended into the night sky. What happened next would become the stuff of legend. At approximately 8 p.m., somewhere over the dense forests of southwestern Washington, Cooper stepped out into the howling wind and darkness. He jumped from the aircraft carrying the ransom money and disappeared into the storm-lashed night. The crew felt the aircraft lurch slightly as Cooper's weight left the plane. The pilots continued to Mexico City as originally instructed, but their passenger was gone. Cooper had vanished into one of the most inhospitable landscapes in the Pacific Northwest. Below him stretched endless miles of dense forest, steep ravines, and treacherous terrain. The weather was terrible, with wind, rain, and freezing temperatures. It was not a night anyone would choose to parachute into the wilderness. When news of the hijacking broke, America was captivated. This was not a typical criminal. Cooper had been polite, professional, and had harmed no one. He had said please and thank you. He had allowed all the passengers to leave safely. He had even worried about the fuel consumption of the aircraft and suggested a fuel stop in Reno. In an era of violent crime and social upheaval, Cooper seemed almost gentlemanly. The FBI launched one of the most extensive investigations in its history. They called it NORJAC, short for Northwest Hijacking. Teams of agents fanned out across the Pacific Northwest. They interviewed witnesses, analyzed evidence, and searched the vast wilderness where Cooper had disappeared. Every lead was followed, every tip investigated, but Cooper had simply vanished. The investigation revealed some intriguing details about Cooper's planning and execution. The choice of the Boeing 727 was not random. It was one of the few commercial aircraft that could be flown safely at such low speeds and altitudes. The specific flight path Cooper requested would take them over some of the most remote and difficult terrain in Washington state. Everything about his plan showed careful thought and preparation. For years, the search continued. Helicopters combed the forests. Ground teams hiked through miles of wilderness. The FBI followed thousands of tips and investigated hundreds of suspects. But the dense canopy of the Pacific Northwest forest seemed to have swallowed Cooper completely. No parachute was found. No body was discovered. No trace of the man who had pulled off the perfect crime. Then, 9 years later, something remarkable happened. On February 10, 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was playing along the Columbia River near Portland. He was smoothing sand for a campfire when his fingers touched something unusual buried in the riverbank. It was a deteriorating bundle of $20 bills held together by rubber bands. The bills were in terrible condition. Some were reduced to the size of business cards. Others were completely black and unreadable. But enough serial numbers remained visible to confirm what the FBI had long hoped to find. These were bills from Cooper's ransom money, the first real evidence of what had happened to the legendary hijacker. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had the money ended up in the Columbia River? Had Cooper survived the jump and tried to hide the evidence? Or had the bills been washed downstream from where his body lay somewhere in the forest? The FBI examined the bills carefully, but they revealed no definitive answers about Cooper's fate. Over the decades, numerous suspects emerged. Ted Braden, a Vietnam War veteran and skilled paratrooper with a criminal background. Richard Floyd McCoy, who executed a similar hijacking just months after Cooper's disappearance. Barbara Dayton, who some claimed had confessed to being Cooper. Each suspect brought new theories, but none could be definitively proven to be the mysterious hijacker. The most intriguing recent development came in 2024, when YouTube investigator Dan Grider discovered a parachute on property connected to Richard Floyd McCoy's family. McCoy had executed a nearly identical hijacking in April 1972, demanding money and parachuting from a Boeing 727. The similarities between the two cases had always been striking, and now there was potential physical evidence linking McCoy to Cooper. But even with this new evidence, questions remain. The FBI had investigated McCoy extensively during the original investigation. He had been in jail for the Cooper hijacking anniversary in some years, and his physical description did not perfectly match witness accounts of Cooper. Could he have been Cooper? Or was this simply another tantalizing clue in a case full of false leads? In 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the FBI officially suspended active investigation of the Cooper case. They had interviewed over 800 suspects, followed thousands of leads, and applied every available investigative technique. The case had consumed enormous resources and yielded no definitive answers. But they left the door open, stating they would reopen the investigation if significant physical evidence emerged. The Cooper case had become more than just an unsolved crime. It had become a cultural phenomenon. Movies were made, books were written, and Cooper became a folk hero. He represented something uniquely American, the idea that one person could outwit the system and disappear into the vast wilderness. He was the polite bank robber, the gentleman criminal who never hurt anyone. But what really happened to D.B. Cooper? Did he survive that terrible jump into the storm-lashed forests of Washington? The weather conditions were brutal. He was jumping at night, in the rain, wearing only a business suit under his parachute. The terrain below was unforgiving, filled with tall trees that could snag a parachute and deep ravines that could hide a body forever. Yet Cooper had demonstrated detailed knowledge of aircraft systems and parachute procedures. His specific flight requirements showed he understood how the aircraft would perform under those conditions. His choice of parachutes suggested experience with skydiving equipment. Was he skilled enough to survive what many experts considered a suicide mission? The money found in the Columbia River provides another piece of the puzzle. Only a small fraction of the total ransom was discovered. If Cooper had died in the jump, wouldn't more of the money have been found over the years? The bills that were discovered showed signs of extended exposure to the elements, but their location near the river suggested they might have been deliberately placed there. Let us analyze this mystery like Sherlock Holmes would. What do we know for certain? Cooper planned carefully and demonstrated specific technical knowledge. He executed his plan flawlessly up to the point of the jump. He chose conditions that made survival extremely difficult but not impossible. The small amount of money found suggests the bulk of the ransom was never recovered. The suspects who emerged over the years each had compelling elements. Ted Braden had the parachuting skills and criminal background. Richard Floyd McCoy executed an almost identical crime and had access to the same type of aircraft knowledge. Barbara Dayton had claimed to be Cooper, though the physical evidence was questionable. Each brought pieces of the puzzle, but none provided the complete picture. The recent discovery of the parachute on McCoy property is intriguing but not conclusive. McCoy was certainly capable of the crime, and the timing of his own hijacking just months later could suggest he was testing techniques first used as Cooper. But the FBI had investigated this connection extensively during the original investigation and found insufficient evidence to prove McCoy was Cooper. What clues might have solved this case? Better weather tracking might have pinpointed Cooper's landing zone more precisely. More advanced forensic techniques applied to the original evidence might have yielded DNA or other identifying information. The Ty Cooper left behind on the plane was tested for DNA, but no matches were found in criminal databases. The aircraft itself provided clues. Cooper's specific requirements for altitude, speed, and configuration showed he understood exactly how the Boeing 727 would behave under those conditions. This suggested either extensive research or personal experience with aviation. But thousands of people in 1971 had such knowledge, from pilots to aircraft mechanics to military personnel. The psychological profile of Cooper also provides insights. He was calm under pressure, polite but firm, and showed no signs of panic or uncertainty. He planned for contingencies and showed concern for the safety of innocent people. This was not the profile of a desperate criminal, but of someone methodical and controlled. The location of the jump offers the final set of clues. Cooper chose to leave the aircraft over some of the most remote and difficult terrain in the Pacific Northwest. This could suggest he was familiar with the area and confident in his ability to survive there. Or it could simply mean he wanted to disappear into terrain so difficult that searchers would never find him. So what happened to D.B. Cooper? The evidence suggests three possibilities. First, he died in the jump, victim of the terrible weather conditions and challenging terrain. His body and most of the money remain hidden somewhere in the vast forests of Washington state. This is what many FBI investigators believed. Second, he survived the jump but died shortly afterward from exposure or injury. The small amount of money found in the Columbia River could be evidence of his attempt to hide or dispose of the ransom before succumbing to his injuries. This theory would explain why so little of the money was ever recovered. Third, and most intriguing, Cooper survived completely and successfully disappeared with the money. He had planned carefully enough to execute the perfect hijacking. Perhaps he had also planned carefully enough to survive the jump and escape detection. In this scenario, Cooper would have lived out his days as one of the few criminals to successfully outwit the entire American law enforcement system. The truth about D.B. Cooper may never be known. After more than 5 decades, the trail has gone cold. The FBI has moved on to other cases. The witnesses have aged, and some have passed away. The physical evidence has been preserved, but it has yielded all the secrets it is likely to reveal. But the legend of D.B. Cooper lives on. He represents something timeless in the American imagination. The idea that one person, with careful planning and nerves of steel, could challenge the system and disappear into the wilderness. Whether he lived or died, succeeded or failed, Cooper achieved a kind of immortality that few criminals ever reach. The case remains officially unsolved, but it continues to captivate new generations of investigators and amateur detectives. Each new piece of potential evidence, like the parachute discovered in 2024, reignites interest and speculation. Perhaps someday, someone will find the final piece of the puzzle that solves the mystery of D.B. Cooper once and for all. Until that day comes, D.B. Cooper remains what he became on that November evening in 1971, a phantom who stepped out of an airplane and into legend. The only person in American history to successfully hijack a commercial aircraft and escape without a trace. The gentleman bandit who said please and thank you as he committed the perfect crime. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery, like and subscribe to Sherlock Mode.